Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and what I want to do today is cover the Q&A document that CIG did on the ARGO SRV. Now, I've kind of broken down the questions into three base categories, being cargo, towing, and just kind of other. So starting with cargo, the question was asked, can the SRV help to load and unload a whole series ship? And the idea was that, yeah, carrying cargo in general is a key component of the design of this ship. It's part of the gameplay arc that they wanted you to use this thing for. So this would end up being kind of a natural task. Now, is this going to be more or less efficient than something like a ARGO cargo? I'm not really sure, and I'm not sure they really know at this point, especially since we don't really have the whole series in-game yet, or the actual manipulation of cargo boxes as opposed to just buying and selling, so we'll have to see how that pans out. Now, in towing, the first question that really came up was one that I think they kind of covered initially, but it was, can the SRV tow a ship in Quantum, and what about jumping between systems? And the answer was yes, in Quantum for sure, because it's basically mandatory, right? I mean, you even look at the scale of what we have in game today, and it would take you forever to just tow a ship not in Quantum from like Yella to Port Alizar for repairs. Now, as far as jump points are concerned, they're still working out the dynamics on how that's actually going to be from a gameplay perspective as far as going through jumps, but they're not planning on the SRV having the ability to allow you to tow somebody through a jump point right now. So the alternative would be that you then have to tow them to a repair facility that's in the system. Their ship would then be repaired, and then they could jump on their own. I was also asked if you can tow asteroids, and they basically came back and said that yes, if they're of appropriate size, yes, you can. But most of the asteroids today aren't actually things that you can interact with outside of, crashing into them. So where it would stand today would be you would probably be able to tow the types of asteroids that you can mine right now, but it should technically be possible. Now, for what people I'm sure are wondering, can you take the Starship Troopers approach and haul asteroids and just chuck them at large ships and stuff? I'm not sure how feasible that's going to be, but it could be interesting to see later on down the line. Can you tow a person in a spacesuit? Well, they said that to prevent griefing, probably not, but even if you could, the size of a person would make it really hard to lock onto them and actually initiate the tractor connection. So it's not a defined gameplay yet. That being said, there's probably not a lot of good reasons to do that in the verse. I guess maybe if they're unconscious, maybe there's some value there, but why wouldn't you just get out and push them? So we'll just have to see, but I'm sure there are some griefing options out there that people are looking forward to, but they're not sure if that's going to be available. It was asked about size. Is there a predetermined number of SRVs that are required to tow certain sizes of ships? And then is what you can tow based on the size or the shape of the ship? And they said that it's really going to focus in more on the mass of the ship. But they do state that there's going to be some size requirements that may be coming in later. So no arbitrary or specifically planned limitations that are going to be in place. It's going to be more, probably 0 to 150,000 kilograms or something like that. And you can end up towing that with one SRV or whatever it may end up being. But, just because one ship is skinny and another ship is wide, that shouldn't have much of an impact, though they may end up doing some things depending on how the tractor needs to connect later on. When asked if towing is going to impact speed and fuel consumption, the answer was kind of two-part. Now, as far as your overall power plant and your ship is concerned, the tractor beam is going to use a lot of power. So when it's in use, the way that the systems today utilize power, if something is using more, the other ones aren't going to be performing as well. Shields are going to recharge slower. Weapons are going to kind of become underpowered pretty quickly. Now, in a ship that doesn't have weapons, that's not a big concern for the weapons, but it is going to impact your thrusters, and it's going to mean that it's going to take longer to get up to full speed, as well as the fact that you're going to be using more engine power, so you're going to be going through more fuel when you're towing somebody behind you. Does the other ship need to do anything to be able to be towed? In order for that to actually happen, in order for that tractor beam to actually initiate the connection, the other ship is going to need to cut their shields and stay pretty still, because it's going to be a little bit of a skill-based thing to make that connection. Now, I don't know long-term if they plan on making you find ways to maintain the connection other than just being in stable flight. We'll have to see on that. But if the other ship, for example, is floating away or is moving on purpose, the SRV can still technically make that connection, but it's going to be a very skill-based task. So I imagine that interface being something like we see with mining today, to where you have to find kind of the sweet spot to make the connection and potentially even maintain it. Now, for some of the other questions that came up, they asked, can you move around vehicles like the Tonk? Well, nothing is really stopping you from doing so. It's essentially just something you're picking up with your tractor connection. It's like moving a cargo box. So maybe later on we see that weight has an impact, but ships are far heavier than any of the ground vehicles that we see today. And if an SRV can tow a vehicle or a ship, it can tow a vehicle just fine. So yes, you could potentially use this to move the tank around and getting it into better locations, and that could be potentially pretty helpful, especially if you start talking about scenarios where terrain becomes problematic. They asked if you can move around outpost modules, and they said no, because it states that the outposts are actually drilled into the surface, and right now only the Pioneer can do it as of this moment. Now, the tractor isn't really strong enough to yank it out of the ground based on that connection. Now, I personally wish this was maybe done just a little bit different, because I like the idea of this being able to move things around and maybe giving an alternative to the Pioneer, but I understand that they need to provide value to the Pioneer, and having the much cheaper SRV being able to set things up probably kind of fights some of that battle a little bit internally. So from a balance perspective, they may not want to let you do that, but it would be nice if you could maybe manually decouple your personal outpost and move it around a little bit as you see fit, but it doesn't sound like that's going to be coming. How are you going to protect against theft, like someone just snagging a ship and towing it away? Well, the initial plan is to say that if shields are on, you can't tow. So it has to be a decision that you make to lower your shields so somebody could take your ship then, and it becomes a decision on your part to let them do that. Now, what that basically means is if you're not in your ship, you need to keep your shields on, otherwise somebody's going to do something. So as far as like powering down your ship, that becomes a little bit more complicated as far as making that decision later. It was asked if the tractor can only pull or can only push, and they said that while it's primarily designed to really pull, you should be able to push it a little bit, because there's going to be kind of a set, distance between the SRV and whatever you're towing. And you don't want this situation to where you slam on the brakes and that other ship hits into the back of you. So it's going to have a little bit of push ability to kind of maintain the safety of the SRV. But you're not necessarily going to be treating this like a bulldozer where you're pushing things around. It's going to be really more in a pull. And I think some of the pushing that you're going to see is just kind of a secondary function of the way that it maintains the other ship. I was asked if the SRV's engines are off, can it latch onto another ship and be pulled by that ship? So essentially utilizing that tractor connection to mean that someone else tows you. And they said technically yes, though it would be difficult in maneuvers to not lose the connection. And the way that I end up kind of reading that is the SRV is probably going to have computers on it that are going to use maybe like IFCS systems to limit maneuvers where the other ship may not do that. So it may be harder to kind of maintain that connection. Can the SRV maintain tractor connections off of a pad through atmosphere and land? Basically meaning that you want to take somebody from Al-Azhar and drop them off on Daymar. Can you do that? And they said that yes, it can. However, there's going to be like environmental factors and atmospheric conditions that may make that connection a little bit harder to maintain there. But one thing that I thought was a very cool note, especially for those of you that have tried taking large ships like a Gemini off of the surface of Hurston, is the idea that part of the gameplay arc that they want for this is to be able to use SRVs to help get bigger ships out of the atmosphere, almost treating it like a tugboat. So I thought that was a pretty cool idea, and for me that has taken some of those large ships up and a very, very slow process. Having some ships helping you do that sounds like a really attractive option. Can the SRV shield be extended to help protect the ship that you are towing? The answer was no. They aren't designed to be able to reach back. If you need to protect any ship that you're towing, you better bring an escort along. It's listed as being heavily shield and durable, but how will it do in combat? Well, the answer there is it has no weapons, so it's going to do poorly. If you're attacked while towing, you're better off just breaking free of the other ship and running. So you may have decent shields and decent armor, but if you can't fight back, running's really your only approach before you're going to get killed, because somebody can wear you down over time. And the last question was, is the dish on the roof for scanning and search and rescue gameplay? And they said right now it's purely a design choice. And I think that was probably there because they initially made the SRV to be a search and recovery vehicle, SRV, but that ended up changing over to standard recovery vehicle. So right now it is purely just a design decision and not necessarily a gameplay impacting one. So that's the SRV. I still think it's a really cool ship. It's one that I'm kind of looking forward to seeing in game and playing with a little bit. If you guys have questions, let me know. Otherwise, stay tuned for more coming soon. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and take care.